The day my uncle's housekeeper called me at 6 in the morning, I was standing in my kitchen in mismatched socks, waiting for coffee to brew. "He's gone," she said. Passed in his sleep. The doctor said it was peaceful. I set down my mug. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there looking at the steam rising from the pot and thinking about the last time I'd seen Uncle Aldous. 3 weeks earlier, at his dining room table, eating pot roast and complaining that the neighbor's dog barked at 3 in the morning. He'd seemed fine. Tired, maybe? But fine. My uncle had never married. No kids. He'd spent 40 years building a small logistics company from a single delivery truck into something real. Warehouses, contracts, a staff of 60. He was the kind of man who remembered your birthday without Facebook and showed up to your graduations even when your own parents forgot. When I was 12 and my mom and dad were in the middle of their worst year, I spent every weekend at his house. He taught me to make pasta from scratch. He let me pick the movie every Friday night without argument. He never once made me feel like a burden. The funeral was on a Thursday. It rained. My mother's side of the family arrived in clusters. My aunt, my mom's older sister, came with her husband and their 2 sons. My cousin Rhett was 34 and wore a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. His younger brother Devin stood slightly behind him the entire time, the way he always had, following Rhett's lead since they were children. My aunt kissed my cheek at the entrance and said it was a tragedy. She said it twice. Then she turned to the funeral director to ask about the reception menu. I sat in the second row. My mother sat next to me, her hand in mine, her eyes dry. She and her sister had a relationship I'd never fully understood. Civil at the surface, something else underneath. She squeezed my fingers once during the eulogy and didn't let go. What I didn't know, sitting there listening to the pastor describe a man who gave quietly and loved loudly, was that Uncle Aldous had already decided. Long before that morning, long before the rain, his attorney called 4 days after the funeral. The office was downtown, 3rd floor, the kind of place with heavy wooden furniture and framed diplomas in Latin. His name was Mr. Plowen, Okafor, a patient, soft-spoken, a man who clearly did this often enough to know how to read a room before he opened his mouth. My aunt and her family sat on one side. I sat on the other. My mother was next to me, but she wasn't named in the will. She'd told me that weeks ago that Aldous had mentioned at once that she didn't expect anything and didn't want me to feel awkward about it. I'd told her she was the least awkward person I knew. She'd laughed. Mr. Okafor went through the standard items first. A bequest to the housekeeper. Miss Hattie had worked for my uncle for 19 years and was getting enough to retire comfortably. A donation to his church. A small fund for his neighbor's kid who wanted to go to college. Then he looked up. The remainder of the estate, he said, including the family home, all investment accounts, and full ownership of Aldous Whitmore Logistics, is left in its entirety to his niece. He said my name. I felt the air in the room change before I understood what had happened. Rhett turned to look at me so fast I heard his neck crack. "I'm sorry," my aunt said, her voice very even. "Could you repeat that?" Mr. Okafor repeated it. He was calm about it. He'd been calm about everything. "That's not possible," Rhett said. "I assure you it is," Mr. Okafor said. "The will was updated 14 months ago and witnessed by 2 independent parties. There is also a letter of intent, signed and notarized, that Mr. Whitmore asked me to read aloud if any portion of this were disputed. No one said anything. Would you like me to read it now?" he asked. My aunt said no. She said they needed time to process. She said it in the same tone she used to say. She needed time to find parking. Like it was a mild inconvenience. Like the room would wait. We walked out into the hallway afterward and my hands were shaking. Not from excitement. From something closer to dread because I had watched my aunt's face when they read the number. The company valuation, the accounts, the property, and what I saw there was not grief. The total came to a little over $9 million. I know how that sounds. I know. I was a 31-year-old middle school art teacher with a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment and a car with a broken AC. The number didn't feel real for weeks. It still doesn't entirely. My uncle had been careful. That's what Mr. Okafor told me later after the others had left. He'd spent the better part of the last 2 years getting everything in order, consulting with accountants, restructuring the company's ownership so it could transfer cleanly, documenting everything. He hadn't told me because he hadn't wanted me to spend any time grieving before I needed to. He said you would try to argue him out of it, Mr. Okafor said, almost smiling. He was right. I would have. What he also told me, quietly, before I left, your uncle anticipated that this might not go smoothly. He left something for you. Not to be read in front of others. He handed me an envelope. I didn't open it until I was in my car, parked in the lot outside. The rain just starting again. You were always the one who showed up. It started, not because you wanted something, because that's just who you are. I watched your cousins my whole life and I love them because they're family, but loving someone and trusting them with the thing you built are two different things. I built this for people who work hard and treat others right. I'm giving it to you because I know you'll remember that. Your aunt is going to be difficult. Let Mr. Okafor handle the legal parts. Don't apologize for what I decided. I made this choice with a clear head and a full heart. Be patient, be firm, don't give an inch. I left a box at the house. Miss Hattie knows where it is. I sat in that parking lot for a long time. My aunt called that evening. She didn't yell. That was the thing about her. She never yelled. She spoke in a particular register that was worse than yelling. A kind of controlled precision that made everything she said feel like a decision already made. I want you to understand, she said, that all this was not well in his final months. His judgment was impaired. What happened today does not reflect his true wishes, and we intend to pursue that legally. I asked her what she meant by not well. He was on 3 medications, she said. He was isolated, he was not making rational decisions. He had been on blood pressure medication, a vitamin D supplement, and something for acid reflux. I knew because I was the one who picked them up from the pharmacy twice when he couldn't drive. He had been sharp until the week before he died. He'd beaten me at Scrabble 2 months ago by 60 points and gloated about it for 20 minutes. I told her I was sorry she was hurting and that I understood this was a shock. She said, "You have a generous spirit, sweetheart, but you need to be realistic. You cannot run a company. You have no business experience. The right thing to do is allow the family to manage the estate together while this gets sorted out." That's what Aldous would have wanted. I almost said something I would have regretted. Instead, I said I needed time to process, and I hung up. Rhett texted me 20 minutes later. Not a message, just a number. The number was 4 million. No explanation. I stared at it for a full minute before I understood it was an offer. He was offering to buy my silence for $4 million, which, if the estate was worth 9, meant he thought I was simple enough not to do the math. I didn't respond. Miss Hattie was at the house the next morning. She was 71 and had worked for my uncle since before I was born. She made coffee without asking and pointed me toward the study. The box was behind a row of books on the bottom shelf. A plain wooden box, the kind you'd find at a craft store, but he'd latched it with a small lock. Miss Hattie handed me the key from her apron pocket. Inside, a USB drive, a notebook, and a short handwritten note. Watch the drive first. I borrowed his old laptop. The drive had one folder labeled with the date 14 months ago, the same date the will was updated. It was a video. My uncle sitting in that same study chair, looking directly at the camera. He looked good in the video. Healthy, actually. Clear-eyed. He was wearing the blue cardigan I'd given him for Christmas 2 years ago. He spoke for 22 minutes. He explained why he was making the recording. He named the date. He named his attorney. He stated clearly that he was of sound mind and that he was making this recording voluntarily, without pressure, to document his intentions. Then he talked about the company, about what he'd built, about the people who worked there. He talked about his sister and her family with more fairness than I could have managed. He said he loved them. He said he also saw, clearly and without anger, that what they wanted from him had always been more about what he could give them than who he was. He talked about me for about 6 minutes. I had to pause it twice. At the end, he held up a notebook, the same notebook in the box, and said, "Everything I've documented in here relates to interactions I found concerning over the last several years, not accusations, evidence. If anyone challenges this will on the basis of my competency, Mr. Okafor has instructions to present this recording and the notebook contents in full." He looked at the camera. "I've been doing this long enough to know how people behave when money is involved," he said. "I'm not naive. I'm prepared. And I'm at peace. He reached forward and turned off the camera. The legal challenge came 3 weeks later. My aunt's attorney filed a petition claiming undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. The language was what Mr. Okafor had expected. He had a response ready. The notebook, it turned out, was meticulous. My uncle had documented 11 separate incidents over 4 years, requests for loans that were never repaid. A time Rhett had asked him to sign over a portion of the company as collateral for a business deal that my uncle later discovered had never existed. A conversation recorded on his phone in which my aunt suggested he consider updating his will to be more equitable to the whole family. He'd written dates, times, exact words. He'd been preparing for this for years. I did not come from a legal family. I did not know before all of this what testamentary capacity meant or how undue influence claims worked. I learned quickly. Mr. Okafor was patient with my questions. He explained that these cases almost always came down to documentation, and that my uncle's documentation was some of the most thorough he'd seen in 30 years of practice. The deposition was in February. I sat across a long table from my aunt's attorney while he asked me questions for 3 hours. My aunt sat at the end of the table and did not look at me once. Rhett wasn't there. Devin was there, and he looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. And at one point our eyes met and he gave me something that wasn't quite an apology and wasn't quite a plea, just recognition, maybe. That he knew. That he'd always known. I answered every question honestly. I had nothing to hide because there was nothing hidden. My uncle had made a clear decision. That was all. The case was dismissed in April. The judge found no evidence of undue influence and noted that the documentation provided by the estate was consistent with a testator in full command of his faculties. My aunt's attorney filed a notice to appeal and then, 3 weeks later, quietly withdrew it. I don't know what changed. Mr. Okafor said sometimes people recalculate when they realize the costs of continuing, legal fees, time, odds. Whatever the reason, it was over. My mother called when she heard. She cried a little, which she almost never does. He knew exactly what he was doing, she said. He always did. I didn't know what to do with a logistics company. That's the honest truth. I'm an art teacher. I know about color theory and how to get acrylic paint off carpet and how to tell a 10-year-old that their idea is worth trying. I do not know about freight contracts or warehouse operations or fleet management. What I did know was this: 60 people worked at that company. Some of them had been there for 15, 20 years. They had health insurance and retirement plans and children in school. Whatever happened next was going to affect them. I spent the first months just listening. I went to the warehouse. I met the operations manager, a no-nonsense woman named Bev, who had been running the day-to-day for 12 years and clearly expected me to sell immediately. I told her I wasn't selling. She looked at me for a long moment and then said, "All right then. Let me show you how this works." Bev became, over the next year, one of the most important people in my life. I won't pretend I was good at it immediately. I wasn't. There were months of steep learning and expensive mistakes in meetings where I understood maybe 60% of what was being discussed. I hired a business advisor. I leaned on Mr. Okafor. I read everything I could find, but the employees, the ones who'd known my uncle, they were patient with me in a way I didn't deserve and couldn't fully repay. They'd seen how he ran things, and they seemed to extend that same trust to me on credit, waiting to see what I'd do with it. Here's what I did. The first year, I didn't take a salary beyond what I needed. The money I saved went back into the company, updated equipment for the warehouse floor, better health insurance options for the staff. There was a woman in dispatch who'd been putting off a surgery for 2 years because of costs. She had it in October. She sent me a card. I still have it. There was a forklift operator, a man in his 50s who'd worked for my uncle for 18 years, who'd mentioned once, casually, not asking for anything, that he'd always wanted his daughter to go to college, but the timing had never been right. I set up a small scholarship fund that year, seeded from the estate, open to employees' children. His daughter applied. She's a freshman now. I don't say these things because I'm good. I say them because my uncle was good, and he gave me the resources to do something he'd already been doing quietly for decades. I just made it more formal. My aunt sent a letter in November of that year. Handwritten, which surprised me. It was not an apology. Not exactly. It was closer to an acknowledgement. She said she had not handled things well. She said she hoped I was doing all right. She said she thought Aldous would be pleased. I read it twice and put it in the box with everything else from that year. I haven't responded yet. I'm still deciding what I want to say. Maybe I'll figure it out eventually. Maybe I won't. Last spring, I finally went through the rest of my uncle's house. The parts Miss Hattie hadn't already sorted. There's a photo on the desk in the study that I'd seen 100 times but never really looked at. My uncle, young, maybe 35, standing in front of a single delivery truck. He's grinning like it's the best day of his life. On the back, in his handwriting, Day 1. Not sure what I'm doing. Doing it anyway. I had it framed. It hangs in my office now, my office, which is strange to say, in the building he bought, running the company he built. I still teach one art class on Saturday mornings. I negotiated it when I started, told Bev I wasn't ready to give that up, that it kept me grounded. She said she thought it was a good idea. She's usually right. I'm 32 now. I own a company I didn't expect. I'm learning something new almost every week, which is terrifying, and also, I realized exactly what he wanted for me. Not the money, not the buildings, the learning, the showing up and not knowing and doing it anyway. Greed moves fast. It sees a number and calculates immediately, before the flowers are even off the casket. What my uncle understood, what he documented in that notebook and recorded in that study and trusted me with on a rainy Thursday in a lawyer's office, is that the people worth leaving things to aren't the ones calculating. They're the ones still crying when the reading is over. He knew which one I was. I try to be worthy of it every day. I've thought a lot about what my uncle actually gave me. Not the company, not the accounts, not the house with the study where he sat in his blue cardigan and recorded himself for 22 minutes so that no one could ever say he didn't mean it. What he gave me was the proof that how you live quietly, the choices you make when nothing is on the line, when there's no audience, when you're just a niece showing up on a Saturday with his prescriptions, that stuff gets noticed. It gets remembered. And eventually, if you're lucky enough to have someone like Aldous in your corner, it gets honored. I used to think inheritance was about bloodlines, about who was closest on a family tree. What I understand now is that my uncle saw something different. He saw that proximity isn't the same as loyalty, that showing up to someone's dinner table because you want their money is not the same as showing up because you love them. He'd watched both kinds of people his whole life, and he knew the difference. He just never made a show of knowing. That's the part that stays with me. He didn't punish my aunt's family. He didn't write them out of spite. He wrote a clear-headed document, recorded himself on video, filled a notebook with dates and facts, and made sure that when the time came, the truth could stand on its own without anyone having to fight for it. That's not revenge. That's wisdom, the kind that takes years to build and looks effortless from the outside. My cousin Rhett texted me a number $4 million, and I think about that sometimes. About what that text reveals, that he looked at a man's entire life's work, 40 years of early mornings and hard decisions, and treating his employees like people, and saw a transaction to be negotiated. That's not greed born from nowhere. That's what happens when someone spends their whole life calculating instead of contributing. The outcome was never really in doubt because the outcome followed directly from the choices everyone had already made long before that Thursday in the lawyer's office. I'm not naturally a patient person. I'm not naturally brave. I spent a lot of those early months at the company just trying not to look as lost as I felt. But Bev would walk me through the numbers, and Miss Hattie would leave food in the kitchen, and the guy in the warehouse who'd worked for my uncle for 18 years would nod at me in the hallway like I belonged there. And slowly, something shifted. Not confidence exactly. More like commitment, the decision to keep showing up even when I didn't know what I was doing, because that's what the work required and the people depended on it. My uncle built something real because he understood that intelligence without integrity is just a tool for taking, and effort without purpose is just noise. He combined all three. He was sharp, he was honest, and he worked. He passed all of it on to me, not in a ceremony or a speech, but in a box behind some books and a video recorded alone in a quiet room. I try to deserve it. Some days I'm better at that than others, but I show up. every single day I show up. And I think that's where it starts. Not with grand gestures or perfect decisions, but with the small, repeated choice to be the kind of person that someone, someday, might actually trust.